delighted to introduce this evening's event. The discussion tonight is the second in a series called AA Collections Talks. In previous years, this series has focused around the AA collections in the archive, the library and the photo library, and it's provided a platform for researchers working with our collections to present their work, and for us it was also an opportunity to show off some of the collections. This year we wanted to broaden the scope and reach of these talks to focus more about the act of collecting and archiving, inviting curators, archivists, academics from various institutions and companies to talk about the current trends, challenges and politics of the culture of collecting and archiving. The final talk in the series is called The Analogue Return, which is on 18th of February, which is about photography collections. So we hope you can come to that one as well. So now I'm delighted to introduce a very distinguished panel of speakers. Helen Thomas is the chair for this evening's talk. She's currently editor and senior research fellow at ATH Zurich. She's worked with digital design records and architecture collections in various situations, including at Phaidon Press, Drawing Matter, and with her work with the V&A RIBA Architecture Partnership. John Sheridan, next to her, is Digital Director at the National Archives, responsible for digital services and digital archiving. He provides strategic direction, developing the people and capability needed to create a disruptive digital archive. Sounds really exciting. I'm just doing it in the order of speakers. Abigail Warne is Digital Preservation Archivist at the West Sussex Record Office. She has worked with digital records in several places, including at the Black Cultural Archives, the University of Sussex Special Collections, and with school archives. David Baldwin, in the middle here, is currently project manager at the London Metropolitan Archives for the London hub of Unlocking Our Sound Heritage, has experience working with audiovisual and digital archives. Fiona Orsini, next to David, is curator of the RIBA Drawings and Archives collections. She's curated several exhibitions, including Underground Journeys, Charles Holden's designs for London Transport. And our sixth speaker, Manon Janssens, next to Abigail, is head of exhibitions and archives at Zaha Hadid Architects. She has experience of managing digital and analog architectural drawings and images, including their use in exhibitions and publications. So I'd now like to hand over to Helen, who's going to be chairing this evening's talk.
Hello. I'll be very brief to leave more time for our speakers to talk about their archives. And just to introduce myself, really I'm an outsider. Although I have been associated with archives for many years, as Eleanor has just described, it's always been from the outside as a researcher or as an interpreter or as a teacher. And so for me, I always imagine the archive as a dark and enchanted forest, enticing, full of latent knowledge and ideas. It is dense and mystifying, and you need a map and a guide to find your way through it. So running courses on archives with students, I propose to them that the archivists that we are going to meet are forbidding and stern academic custodians with secret codes and rules. But when we actually get to meet them, we find this to be completely untrue. Everyone we met was open, enthusiastic and welcoming, and showing us paths through the forest. But the question is, what is the forest today? The implicit subject of today's discussion is the digital image and the difference that this has made to the discipline of the archive. Is this okay? So the first digital image was made in the 1920s, but since the development of the internet, there's been a rapid development in its technology. And now the myriad ways of making and manipulating, collecting, disseminating and sharing them presents huge challenges. The intensity and speed of change in the means of production, meaning and storage is exciting, but the question is how to future-proof so that images produced today can still be viewed in 10 or 20 years' time. So in a way, we see the World Wide Web as our collective archive, something that is opposite to traditional archives. We see the internet as transparent and democratic, a place of unbounded possibilities. But this lack of boundaries creates problems and questions. For example, if everything is equal, how does something acquire value? Digital images are easily manipulated, so what constitutes a true original in this situation? Evolving markets produce new and wonderful tools and technologies, but also rapid obsolescence. The interfaces between the public world of the open internet and the specialist worlds of the artist, the architect, the library and the archive are also changing. Each of our speakers today faces these and many other challenges in creative ways. And I was going to mention them, but I think Eleanor did a great job of introducing everybody. So I'll just say that when Eleanor and I met to talk about the event today, we realised that we were coming at the idea of the archive and the image from completely different directions. Well, not completely, but different ones. For me, as the inside-outsider, the questions were tangential to the archive. It is the presence of the digital image in the world that is a fascinating question. Its proliferation, questions about authorship, originality, sampling and copying, the relationship of a digital image to the material analogue, original if there is one, and the impact on its value, ownership of copyright and image making as a livelihood. But for Eleanor as an insider, the concerns of the archivists were paramount and therefore much more strategic. She had questions about collaboration and acquisition, what and how to collect them. Also the challenges and the means of inventing and managing systems for preserving and revealing the contents of the archive were important to her. So today's speakers give us a privileged opportunity to find out more about these questions. And I'm looking forward to hearing about how their enchanted forests are planted, organised and husbanded, mapped and negotiated. And the first person who's going to talk about this is John Sheridan.
So I don't know how many of you have visited or experienced some of what we hold at the National Archives. I love the idea of it being an enchanted forest. We're an institution, though, that finds itself at a strategic inflection point. As the Archive of Government, for 180 years, most of our history has been involved with identifying, selecting, appraising, preserving and providing access to physical records. And like many other archives and archivists, digital has been messing with our heads. Now, to give you a sense for that, I have this one image from Magritte. It plays with the idea of representation and I think conveys something of the challenge for the digital archivist. Now, of course, even in the era of physical records, the minutes of the cabinet meeting were never the meeting. But digital adds another layering to that representational challenge. The record is intangible and in some senses fragile. All the archive can do is make copies over time and check that those copies are the same thing and manage the risks to reproducing the record using the technology of the present and keep on managing those risks as technology changes under our feet. There is no permanent solution to the challenge of digital preservation. There is only institutional commitment to keep records alive through generations of technological change. It also means accepting a breakdown in the vertically integrated archive, where the archive does storage and does conservation and does access. That kind of tightly vertically integrated archive isn't going to make much sense in an era where we can buy a petabyte of storage for $12,000 a year from Amazon, perhaps. Now, it means reflecting hard on the practices that we have established as institutions, as archives and archivists. In a context where there are no permanent solutions, we have to develop practices that allow us to take our truly limited quantity, which is our money, and turn that in maximum benefit in terms of managing preservation risk over time, in terms of providing context in an era of a globally deployed information infrastructure, the World Wide Web, and providing access in a complex information rights landscape, balancing the rights of owners, copyright owners, data subjects, balancing the rights of the present and the future. We believe this calls for a fundamental shift in archival practice. For example, how we think about, understand, and manage preservation risk. For example, how we think about providing trust and assurance as the archivist necessarily becomes a much more active player in the life of the records that he or she preserves. And for example, over how we assure trust and authenticity in a world where everything is just a maybe. Maybe this is a record. Maybe this is a representation of this thing. We call this the disruptive digital archive. And for the archival profession, it's the challenge of a lifetime. There's never been a more exciting time to be an archivist.
Yeah. So our next speaker is Abby.
Okay, so I'm an artist. I'm now very excited. Thank you. So I have experience, as mentioned at the beginning, of working in a few different places. So at the moment I'm at West Sussex Record Office, and previously I was at the Black Cultural Archives. I've also worked with school archives and at the University of Sussex. So I have experience working in tiny places where I'm the only archivist, and then bigger places where there's lots of us together helping each other out. And I'm mainly going to talk today about the digital stuff that I work with now and have been working with over the years. And I think it's important to mention that when it comes to this digital stuff, the link between preservation and access is much more immediate. So unlike the physical, we can't just put it in a box, forget about it, and wait until someone says, oh, I'd like to look at those files, please. They actually require ongoing intervention. So put simply, the shorter lifespan of digital records means that preservation action must be timely and appropriate. So I want to focus on a little case study very quickly, which I'm going to attempt to illustrate why this is. So the items, I can't actually reveal what it is because like most digital collections, it's still going through a process of terms and conditions being agreed. You'll see why in a moment. But it's very typical of a 21st century digital archive. It reflects a project where there were artistic events, so there's lots of collaborators working on things like design, promotion, films, communication, events management, curation, etc. So in this short presentation, I'll just go through 6 key points to illustrate what I think of every time a digital deposit is made. And I used to be a primary school teacher, and digital preservation is quite hard to illustrate, so I used my primary school teacher's skills by drawing this picture. Okay, so number 1, the first thing I think about is ownership. So you all know it's really easy to make copies of the digital stuff you have. So I will check whether we'll be the sole owners of the digital material during initial conversations with the depositor, because traditionally it's hard to justify preserving something that is already being preserved by someone else. However, this is a big but. I really am not sure how realistic that is in the digital world, because this example, I know that all of the things that came in are probably on various different people's computers somewhere else. So that's the first point. I also need to think about whether something is purely born digital or whether it's a digital surrogate. So in this example, I discovered that one of the films was actually a copy of a film being held by another archive. And that's really significant because it will have an impact on how it will be made accessible. And I think this is a really interesting point. I don't really deal with digital artworks, but I have spoken to archivists who do. I think ownership is really complex because when it comes to art, the concept of the original is inextricably linked to value. So when you can make copies of things, that makes it very difficult. How do you transport an artwork from one gallery to another, for instance, for display? And I think that in itself could be a whole evening's discussion. So the next point is the nature of the material. So I want to think about the format. That's things like whether it's a JPEG or if it's a TIFF. We have our own preferences. We want well-established formats because they're viewed as more robust, or open formats because due to their non-proprietary nature, they're supported by more software applications. And in this case, it was really simple. I just said what we preferred, and the depositor agreed. However, we do often get hybrid collections that might contain a box of floppy disks. They are the only copies of those records. They're not even really sure what's on there. So it comes to me, and then it's up to us to transfer it onto media that's more secure. And a big thing I want to talk about here is, it might sound obvious, but the size of a collection. So the decision to take in a large collection for me would involve talking to the county archivist and the IT team. Anyone who's worked for a local authority will know how challenging that can be. So I really want to stress that if you're an archivist and you're agreeing to preserve something digital on an ongoing basis, you need to be sure that you have the storage and infrastructure in place to do so. At the start of this presentation, I mentioned that I've worked in smaller archives, and in these roles, I would really say it's just a lack of resources, and that's usually budget and just staff, people to do the work, that prevented progress in digital preservation more than anything else. So we could take things in, but they might just sit on a server, and that was it. We might not even be able to take a large collection in because it was too big. We wouldn't be able to afford the space. Thirdly, we want to inform the depositor that we will perform preservation actions. So, as John mentioned, we might want to do a format migration. So if something's becoming obsolete, we'll migrate it to a new format, essentially changing the record. I've never known a depositor to place restrictions on this, but it's possible that they could. We also ourselves need to note any of those changes because it has an impact on the record's authenticity. And this is stored as metadata. In fact, there's even standards for that metadata because we're archivists. We like standards. And this leads to the next point, metadata. So as well as preserving the bits, preserving the infrastructure that helps us make sense of these bits, we also need any metadata, and that's the data about the data. So for example, the data photograph was created, who created, where it was taken, all of that information is preserved as well. And I like to communicate that to the depositors because sometimes they don't even know what metadata is or how important it is. This fifth point, lots of the things I've spoken about are applicable to physical archives, but this fifth point I think is a really big digital issue, which we spoke about before this event started, and that's the volume of data. So in the example I'm using here, the depositor wanted to deposit a collection of emails originally, but this was a project that lasted several years. So that's thousands of emails from hundreds of people. That includes attachments and links, hyperlinks, and basically loads and loads of sensitive personal information. We couldn't guarantee that we could take it in and go through every email because our digital preservation system called Preservica, that isn't automated. It doesn't do that for us. We'd have to go through one by one. So an appraisal decision was made that they wouldn't give us those emails at this stage. And finally, intellectual property. So who holds the copyright? Will it be transferred to the archive? And if not, what is the agreement around use? In my example, the digital records were created by several different people and different organisations. The depositor only holds a small percentage of this copyright and is still deciding what to do, whether they're going to transfer it completely or just give us permissions to do certain things. And this is really, really important because there's no point in keeping stuff if people can't access it. So at this early stage, we must establish clearly things like whether we can put it online, whether it can go in a computer in a reading room, whether we can put it in a book. And without that information, our ability to share the material is really compromised. So coming to an end, I just want to have a little word of warning of what would happen if you don't do all of these things. So without permissions, you get situations like this. So this is an archive sat on the shelf at West Sussex Record Office that we can't do anything with. We are going to do something with us, but it means backtracking to find all of that information out. And some of the media in these boxes has become obsolete, as have some of the formats, and some of the metadata is missing, and there's no permissions. I know they're oral history, so some of the people may no longer be with us, so it's just a bit sad. The big archive is, we'll hopefully solve some of the problems, but at the moment it's not great. So to conclude, I just want to emphasise that I always work closely with depositors to ensure that the material at West Sussex Record Office can be made accessible to the public. And that basically future-proofing is at the heart of what I do. As my email address.
So, David?
Yes. My name is David. I work at London Metropolitan Archives, but I'm also chair for the film sound and photography section for the Archives and Records Association. And part of that role is to work with people who have, or archivists with specialist collections in their archive. And as we touched on, through the training that we get as archivists, I think inherently we're quite nervous people. I'm quite a nervous person. So a lot of the training we do when managing the analogue is to just make sort of informal introductions between the film reel and the archivist and let them know that everything's okay, you can handle it, and also engage with it. So what I'd like to do in the next 5 minutes is talk a little bit about the journey from the analogue to the digital and how important it is not just to leave those film reels on the shelf, but actually take a leap of faith and engage with it. So like photographs, drawings or maps, analogue AV recordings do require specialist knowledge. They do require controlled storage conditions, humidity, temperature control, but they also require safe handling to hopefully ensure their time within the archive is a happy one. For the archivist, that can be quite stressful, even, as I was saying, just going near films or videos. A recent training event that I did, there was a lot of joking about a box of videos that had been on the shelf for the last 20 years. I didn't find that funny. I thought, actually, that's not something to joke about. We need to actually get engaged with the video. Sorry, next. If I say next, it's just I'm talking to Helen. There we go. Managing the analogue can be difficult, but it's something that archivists need to proactively engage with. Digitising the analogue. Digitising AV stock can be expensive because you need to find the right people to do it. It's quite a complicated process, so there's a lot of preparation, a lot of cleaning before it even hits the various 16 or 35mm reel equipment that it needs to have to enable the transfer. But again, it's a necessary evil because of the risk of degradation, but also obsolete playback equipment. And I've found through the work that I've done through the Archives and Records Association that it's very important to not isolate yourself, but start those conversations as soon as possible. Join networks, find partners within the London area. London Metropolitan Archives works closely with the London Screen Archives. And recently, over the last 3 years, worked with the BFI and the Britain on Film programme, which work with various London Borough archives as well as museums and libraries to digitise film and put it on a platform which actually raise the profile of collections for London boroughs, therefore raising their service to a wider audience, but also showing that archives do have these amazing sort of films and videos in their collections. Next. So once you've digitised it, accessing the digital, particularly for moving images, can be quite a nightmare. So obviously you've got the rights of the director, but also scores, soundtracks, everything involved within a film production. But also data protection issues and also sensitivity issues. So recently I was working on a series of videos for the Inner London Education Authority, and they did a series on interviewing teenagers about coming out. And at that time, they may have felt comfortable with talking about that. But beyond the video, we don't know what happened, whether they moved away from that dialogue or whether they accepted the conversation or whether family knew about it. So sensitivity is a real big part, as well as data protection rights with working with film. With third-party ownership in particular, online use can be, again, challenging, but with certain exceptions within copyright, on-site access can actually help access these films, which can be problematic. Next. And then finally, I've got a great picture in front of me, never mind. So it's all right, is curating the digital. So reaching new audiences, whether new or existing, will require the archivist to be a curator. So again, the archivist stepping out of their sort of traditional comfort zone. But by sort of sharing the content within their archives within a reasonable and responsible way, you can often learn more about the film and video you hold in your collections, which, as we've spoken about, with resources and time and staffing, is not always possible. A project I'm working on at the moment, we'll be working closely with volunteers and how it's a sound project, and how they will be clipping the sound and reimagining the interpretation of that sound within their own communities, within their own contexts. In particular with film, we worked with the Thames Mead Festival recently, which projected a film on Thames Mead from 1974 as part of a living archive hub space. With music, voices, residents' voices and their interpretation of Thames Mead. Because obviously from the outside, you hear lots of things about Thames Mead, Clockwork Orange, Stanley Kubrick, but from what happens inside is a very important conversation to be had. So yeah, just to sort of wrap up, it's very important, I think, to not stand by and watch a film and video sort of deteriorate on the shelf, but find as many possible avenues as you can, mainly with partners, and try and exploit it as much as possible. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Fiona Orsini. I'm Curator of Drawings and Archives at the RBA, Royal Institute of British Architects. And I'm mainly going to be focusing on analogue, because that's really what I deal with on a sort of day-to-day basis, and more to do with the sort of access and the different sorts of formats that we have in our collection. Next. So we have an off-site store. Just to give you a bit of a background, so the Drawings and Archives collection at the V&A the collections are actually split. So we've got the main library over at 66 Portland Place, not far away from here, and that's books, journals and photographs, and then the drawings collection and the manuscripts collection is housed mostly at the V&A. We went into partnership with the V&A some years ago now. However, in the time that I've been at the RBA, which is about 12 years, I'm afraid that the collection has grown somewhat. And obviously space is a continual issue, physical space that is. And so our off-site collection now is probably over 50% of our collections. So consequently, access to those collections is growing. So we have an off-site store not too far away in Fulham, which we have a reading room, as you can see here, which does allow researchers to come generally on a sort of once a month basis, if we can manage that. So this all looks very neat and tidy and very organised. However, there is something behind the doors that reveals a whole different world. So this is our store, and as you can see, there are lots of different formats in terms of what we have in the drawings collection. So the image on the left-hand side at the top, that kind of gives you a sense of the different types of formats that we have for drawings. So that can be flat drawings in portfolios, it can be framed items, but then we also have a lot of rolls of drawings. That's the favoured way that architects obviously store their collections. And quite frankly, that is quite problematic when it comes to coming into the archive. So we've got lots of different types of rolls as well before we're able to get them processed and put them into the proper archival packaging, which you see on the right-hand side. So it's a much more efficient way of storing. Not only better, obviously, for the collections themselves because it's archival, but also being square tubes, which are also telescopic, which makes it much easier for different sorts of size of rolls of drawings. And then we also have, like I say, lots of flat drawings in portfolios, but they also come to us often in, when they're oversized, they're in plan chests. So we're having to deal with multiple different types of material just within the drawings side. And so this means that there's lots of multiple types of housing. Next. So on the archive side, the RBA's archives are kind of split into two areas. So we have the manuscripts collection, which is essentially the papers of architects and architectural historians and architect-related organisations. And they are actually split across two different sites, but we do have a lot of material at the off-site store. And then we also have the RBA's own institutional archives, which are big and do get looked at a huge amount. So it's like a company archive, I suppose you could say. And they come in, again, lots of different sorts of formats. So you've got bound volumes, big, heavy, awkward volumes, as well as lots of different sorts of boxes as well. You've got box files, you've got bankers boxes, you've got record storage boxes. So lots of multiple different sorts of formats. So that is something that we're having to deal with a lot more in terms of the access. It does throw up quite a lot of challenges just with the analogue. A lot of the collections are quite large. They're not processed or they're only semi-processed, and it's something that it's a constant challenge in terms of providing that access. Something that is even more tricky, which we've kind of heard about, is the digital archives. So this is something that we don't have a huge amount of in the RBA at the moment, but it is an area that's obviously growing. What we're finding is that a lot of the material that's coming in at the moment is hybrid. So it's architects that have started off in the analogue, and then we've got some sort of early versions of the digital. So you've got some quite old digital formats up on the left-hand side there, floppy disks and CDs and cassettes as well, of which obviously we've got absolutely no idea what's on them, because the hardware is not always easy to get hold of in terms of seeing what's actually on there. So we're having to deal with that. And then we've also got some examples of databases. So this is an example of we've got the database of the Charles Correa archives. This was created by the practice. It was shared with the RBA and with MIT, but it's on a read-only basis. So we can make it available to people, but we can't do anything with it. We can't print anything out, and we can't edit it or do anything with it. It's kind of stuck at a particular time. So you could kind of question, you know, what's its purpose really? It's great for information, but that's about as far as it goes really. So again, this might be something that other people will be coming across in terms of, you know, databases that are created and websites as well, how you deal with, you know, digitizing or preserving a website at a given time. Thank you.
Now I'm just handing over to Manon.
So my name is Manon. I work for Zaidid Architects since 15 years now, and I'm responsible of the archive and the exhibitions of the office. Thank you. So today I will try to speak about the challenges of collecting and managing digital archives within an architectural practice. So of course the practice has an amazing physical archive, but also a digital archive. And I thought I can't really talk about the archive without also briefly mentioning the physical archive, because it's not that easy to manage physical archives, especially not in our situation. So what are the challenges of the physical archive? First of all, it's the diversity of our collection. Of course, we have an architecture archive in front of us. We have drawings, we have paintings, we have sketches, we have diagrams, models, a lot of prototypes. But in our case, as many of you know, we have a lot of paintings, but we also have a lot of design items, we have a lot of furniture pieces. We also take care of the awards the office was lucky to win. We are recording a lot of project documentation, but we are also recording memorabilia. So it's quite a vast collection, and it's quite tricky to take care of all these items at the same time. It's also an ever-growing collection, so the challenges are, we have about 400 architects in the office, and they obviously produce material every single day. So it's difficult sometimes for the archive team to try to make sure we cater for everything that is being produced. The scale and the dimension of the items we have to archive are also really challenging in our case, because the architectural model would be more or less in the middle there in this scale, but we have really big installations like the Aura, which is 6 meters long. We have flow vases, which are, as you can see, 2 meters by 1. We have very heavy tables, we have set chairs, which are not that tricky to archive. And then the smallest item would be a ring, probably, which is more or less 1 by 1 centimeter. So the variety of items is quite tricky to take care of. because it's not just a model we can carry from A to B, but we often need very specific equipment to move items around. For example, for this table, which is a beautiful piece in marble, it poses a lot of challenges because it's about 1,300 kilograms. So to move it around, you will appreciate that for a normal archive, it's quite challenging. Of course, we have different locations. So we have to deal with our own archives, with our own offices, with different loans we make throughout the years, with different clients that might be archiving our pieces. And so this is, for example, a diagram of the different storage locations we have. Not everything is in London. There are lots of different reasons why we keep items in the States or in Italy or in Austria. So it's quite tricky to keep all this together. And the same for the offices. We have quite a few offices by now. Some are big offices, some are site offices, but still they all have models, they all have awards, certificates. So it's again quite challenging to make sure we keep all of this under one roof. Now, what are the challenges of the digital archives? They are very different, obviously. And for this digital archive, we had to find a solution to keep all the information under one roof, because in previous times, all the images, all the folders were a bit all over the place. So the database we have chosen for this is the Open Asset platform that my colleague Henry, who is here, is populating day after day. So we have an amazing amount of images by now, which is about 90,000, which is recorded by project, is recorded by category. So we have drawings, we have photographs, we have awards. So it was really important to be able to categorize the items, not just by project, but also make sure you can search for a model or search for a painting. So the way we had to archive these items was quite challenging too. We do collaborate with other institutions. Our collection is not online yet, but for example, the MoMA has work from our practice, and they have put their collections online, so we work with them in order to make sure that what they are publishing is correct. And also it's important to inform our own collection with items that are stored elsewhere. So there is this collaboration. Unfortunately, we cannot open up our archives yet because of copyright issues or because of copyright with photographers as well, artistic licenses. So it's quite difficult to just invite people in the office and say you can check whatever you like. We also obviously take part in a lot of competitions, and therefore sure we couldn't just share the information. An interesting case scenario is the donation we did a few years ago to the CCA, the Canadian Centre of Architecture. This is the first time that we actively donated a copy of digital born material. You will see a bit further, it's about 40,000 files that we donated, but we copied everything. So it's a copy that we donated because we wanted to keep ownership of the project. We wanted to be able to use the images, to use the drawings, to use anything related to the project. So it was quite tricky to come to an agreement, but in the end they agreed to have a copy of the files. But the copyrights there are quite interesting because of course we want to say it's our material, but they would like to say it's their own collection. So at some point they obliged us to say this isn't a drawing obviously of a project of sighted architects, but it's part of the collection of the CCA. And it's quite tricky because it's a digital file, so we have the file as well, so why would we as an author have to say it's the actual file sits with them, whereas we know we have a copy. So there were a lot of funny and strange considerations to make. And also what is quite incredible, we have decided in our archive to be very selective and to only upload the best images of the projects, to talk to the teams to make sure that anything they find important is really catered for. But we would not just upload anything and everything on the archive because that would just create a big amount of information. Whereas the CCA came from a very different standpoint. They wanted to archive everything and to have the whole folder. They were not interested in our small curated archive of this specific project. So they physically went to analyze this 86 gigabytes of information, which for the office was a bit of a strange decision, because why would you really want to check all these different files? We use a lot of different file formats and different softwares. I checked with the IT team, and we have about 255 different softwares in the office. So I challenge any archivist to try to study all these softwares, try to understand all these different plugins, all these different coding that has been applied to different and specific parts of projects. But they went ahead and used different techniques to understand, for example, for this project, what was used in terms of software. So this is a bit more information about their research. They are very happy with the research. We are very happy that they took the time, the resources, and put some budget towards this project. So now if you go to the CCA, you can physically go and check the archives there of our project. They have removed some confidential information because we gave them really everything. So for example, who was invited to the opening, you had all the list of all the email addresses. So they have removed a lot of information. But if you go there in person, you have access to everything. We didn't remove anything at all. But this is the first time and the only time we had been asked for an archive, so we donated it, but I'm not too sure how easily we would do this again. The exhibitions are changing a lot because the audiences are changing as well. So, of course, we have beautiful paintings, beautiful models, but nowadays we are seeing that the audiences that come to our exhibitions more and more want to see interactive items. So we have often videos. We produce a lot of videos, but this, the VR is quite changing the experiences for a lot of audiences. In Mexico, we had people queuing for up to 2 hours to be able to experience one of our VR installation, which is quite amazing. I don't think we would ever have that for a painting or a drawing, but so that's quite something new that we have to cater for. And then what's interesting also, for example, 3D files, are they becoming more valuable than the actual objects? In the past, we were always insuring our model for quite a substantial sum. Obviously, they were handmade. A lot of care was taken into producing the models. They are really beautiful. And there was no digital file, clearly, to produce them, whereas now we have 3D files that we have to save and preserve onto our servers. But it's actually the file that is becoming more important than the output, because the 3D models, as you see here, is more like almost a photocopy. You just press on a button and the model comes out. So when we, especially here in Venice, when we had 2 models were stolen. So when we had to go to the insurance company, they didn't want to pay for a big amount. We had insured it at for a certain budget, but the insurance said, no, this is a 3D model, you just reprint it. So we just give you only the cost of how much it costs you to reprint. What was challenging was to find out of those 100 different files, which exact file was used to produce that model that went missing. So now we have all systems to make sure we know exactly which model, which file was used to produce which model. But so those are all things that are quite changing the archive. It's no longer just you archive what you see and you take some pictures. So now it's challenging us because certain files we can't really easily manage or archive. So yes, that's a bit what we are dealing with.
That was a really good collection of stories about all the different challenges that archives are facing in the digital world, but also I think interesting touching upon the relationship with the analog and I like the way that databases came up as something that somehow has a physical quality to it as well as a digital. I mean, there are so many questions to ask of you. I thought maybe to start with the beginning of, which is, I guess, I mean, I speak as an outsider, as I said at the beginning. We always imagine that archives have some kind of objectivity to them, but of course, a lot of decision making has to go on. I think all of you talked about that in different ways. And I'm just wondering if you could open up a discussion about how, you know, like, is there an ethic? How do you make decisions about what you're going to collect and what you're going to leave out and what you're going to look for? I don't know who wants to start with that one.
I think in our office it's quite tricky to keep the same line with every single team. So there's a lot of course you want to explain how the project is designed, what challenges it faced, what is so unique about the project. But in order to be able to write that story, you really have to speak to the teams. It's often not enough to just try to go through their folders to understand how they came to the conclusion to that specific design, which obviously results in amazing options. Certain teams are happy to be interviewed in different practices, not in our case, but so certain teams have interviews. When we try to propose that, a lot of teams say, no, I definitely don't want to be interviewed about my projects. So, but it could be really interesting to hear the story behind your designs. So that's at the moment not really something we are doing. Other teams are very protective. They don't want to share the information for some obscure reason. And sometimes the teams are very enthusiastic and very proud about their project, so they would release hundreds of images. But then we have to say this is not
a
really
shared decision then between you and the narrative that the team creates.
Yes, and it's really not always that straightforward.
Yeah. And I guess, I mean, an interesting contrast between your very private archive in a way, in that it belongs to an architect's office, and the more public archives that all of the rest of the speakers deal with. Is there a similar kind of process that takes place?
Yeah, I would agree. Actually, it's similar to what Manel's suggesting for the RBA, in that we will, you know, where possible. It's not always possible. We will talk to the donors. Hopefully, I mean, if we can talk to the architects directly, if not the people closest to the donors who might still be around, it's important to find out about those individual projects really, and what was important for them, in order to understand what is important to keep and what is potentially, you know, to sort of surplus the requirement. Because you know, you have to, particularly with large archives, it's not really, apart from all the issues of space and the resources, you know, and the cost in keeping all this material, but also it's just not conducive, you know, for researchers who've got to wade their way through lots of material that may not actually be really relevant. So you do have to have that editing process.
The narrative is coming from the producer of the material.
Yeah.
And I mean, I was struck by something that John said at the beginning in his talk about how with the analogue you have there's an equivalent to the minutes of a meeting, but then when it becomes digital there's a huge amount more information or more layers of reality that are recorded. I wonder, I mean, I think Abby, you talked about it as well, that there's this huge volume of...
Yeah, so with the most recent deposit I was talking about, that was a decision that was made by the depositor again. So he thought, oh, maybe it would be nice to donate the emails, but then when he really thought about it, he changed his mind. So,
and when you were telling that story, I was thinking, but those personal messages, the stories you could make up.
But I think if you think about your own personal emails or on a day-to-day basis, the emails you'll send, and especially if you're dealing with events, and like you were saying, that list of important attendees, and if it's a project that has funders, there's certain information that you wouldn't want to be made public. So I think he just, from a risk assessment point of view, thought until I'm sure that you can make it accessible in a way, in a certain way, I'll look after it myself, and then when you're ready for it, I'll give it to you. But it it's interesting working with depositors, isn't it? Sometimes it can be a compromise. I've worked with depositors who want to, they'll say, we give you this, but you must also take my library. And that kind of thing does happen. So it is a collaborative process, and it can take a long time, can't it?
So I think this is one of the areas where archives and archivists most need to shift our thinking, because traditionally the archivist has been worried about too much, and volume has been a challenge, and is a challenge for a physical archive. Your costs for storage and conservation rise linearly with the size of your collection. For digital archives, it's not like this at all. It's variation that drives your cost rather than volume. And volume, you can, if you give me 10 kilobytes, 10 gigabytes, or 10 petabytes of digital objects, all of the same type, the amount of work that the archive has to do to preserve that content doesn't vary that much. Whereas if you give me 100 kilobytes of 5 or 6 different types of things, suddenly I'm on the hook for managing a range of digital preservation risks over time rather than one risk. So variation becomes our big concern rather than volume. And secondly, from the perspective of the researcher, in the big data era, volume is powerful in terms of the sets of research questions that you can ask and answer of a collection. So if I have a lot of seemingly meaningless email exchanges between people, say in government with the Archive of Public Records, I can compute and understand the changing nature of the social graph. Who knew who was buddies with who? And maybe I can start to map that to patterns of decision making. So lots and lots of individually unimportant artifacts in aggregate have real expressive power, which again counters the traditional archivist worry that you need to weed out the dross. So because researchers only want to look at the individual things, well, if I can compute over it, I want everything, because I can squeeze out informational value from very large collections of seemingly meaningless stuff. This is where we really need to shift our practice, because at the moment our approaches to appraisal and selection are designed in the old paradigm, worrying about volume rather than variation, and not perceiving the value of, in aggregate, we're kind of in search of what used to be a record. And perhaps we need to stop being in search of what used to be a record and concentrate on, from first principles, what has value.
And just, I mean, you're talking about searching, and I think that's kind of interesting. Are you proposing a different way of searching in the archive?
So, I mean, there's a whole discipline that's growing up called computational archival science, where people are thinking about how can you work with archives, digital archives, in fundamentally different ways. And this is very much bringing to bear the lessons of the big data era. Now, this is dangerous stuff for archives, because what happens when you bring the archive into connection with large-scale compute? And how do we do that in a way that both realises value from the archive, but that's ethically sound and retains public trust, which is so important for the archive to be able to do the extraordinary things it needs to do to preserve the record for future generations. Now, frankly, I don't think archivists, and we certainly don't have much of a sense about what the public expectation is in terms of large-scale compute over a large-scale digital public archive. We've got no real idea about what people imagine the kind of compute could do. Again, we need new practice. and we need to have some new conversations if we're to deal with some of those fundamental issues. And again, our traditional practice is a poor guide to what we now need to do.
I mean, I think that's interesting because there is the Victorian idea of history of collecting absolutely everything, and that, you know, in a way, an archive is an act against that. But now there's this possibility that you can collect everything and then you search it in different ways. And I'm wondering if that affects any of the more. I mean, David was talking. I mean, you were talking about a very incredibly time-consuming activity of the transfer from video to digital and the collection of oral histories. I mean, do these ideas of, but then you work in the London Metropolitan Archive, and London is a city which is producing infinite amount of data information. Is there a tension there between these kinds of activities?
Well, I mean, talking about collecting as well, we have to keep an open dialogue with all of the London Borough Archives as a responsibility, you know, to make sure that for instance, film are in the right place. So we do get approached a lot from, say, amateur filmmakers from Hampstead or from Camden. They say, oh, can we give it to you? And then we go back to Camden and Hampstead and say, oh, we've had this inquiry. It's about opening that conversation to make sure that it's in the right place. But then often we get Hampstead or Camden coming back and saying, oh, actually, we're happy for you to take it. But it's been part of a broader network, like I mentioned before, London Screen Archives, which is working to make sure information is available about films across London, sharing catalogues, sharing digitised films and video to showcase where the public can go. And I think access is quite important because when I deal with depositors, the main thing is legacy, but it's visible legacy. So they're giving you their film, but they want to see it online immediately. Yeah. So when you take them through the idea and the complexities of digitization and then the cost, and then obviously rights with an amateur film usually lies with the filmmaker, but if they have, say, a film from a grandparent perhaps that's come into their possession that was part of a production, then you get into sort of murkier waters. But I think sometimes as well, in terms of access, again, a level of risk management is there. So even if the catalogue is online and people know it's there and through exceptions within copyright they can come on site and have a look at it, you can learn a bit more about the film itself and hopefully find out where to go to make those initial conversations to find out about ownership, rights, things like that. So again, I keep going on about networks, but it really, keep talking. That's the biggest
point
message.
I wrote down. I think it's really interesting when you were talking, but everybody talked about it, that the digital opens up the possibility for a multi-authored object. I mean, I encountered it when I was doing some research recently that an artist was working in collaboration with an architect, and the architect they were having conversations. The architect was formalising it in a drawing, in a detailed drawing, and then the artist was drawing on top of it, sending it back on a WhatsApp message. And then we had this conversation, who owns the copyright of that WhatsApp message? The artist, of course, claimed that he did. And the architects were civilized enough to say that was fine. But, you know, it was really, there was no really one objective right answer. And this must be something that you're encountering all the time. You know, what is who owns the copyright of the object and who is the author of it? I think I've got one more thing I wanted to ask about, but then we could open up to questions from the floor. I mean, again, it's from the outsider about what I enjoy about archives. And I really love visiting reading rooms. I mean, what's come up in the discussion is, especially with what John was just saying, is that there's been a shift from the idea of taking up space to an idea of taking up time, and you all talked about the economy of time, the time that's spent on working with files and objects. But if all archives are digital, what happens to the reading rooms? You know, where do researchers go to to enjoy these privileged, lovely spaces where you can have a human engagement with an archivist who can guide you through what you're researching.
Sorry, my experience is particularly in conversation with our public services team, because obviously their jobs are on the line when people start talking about mass digitisation, and then the physical archive's gone. But our audiences always want to come in and experience the physical object. The digital is really just a sort of springboard or platform for people to know where to find it. Particularly for, obviously for film, we can't bring out the file, and but particularly for photographs, maps, and drawings, you experience a greater connection with the physical object than necessarily would with the digital object. But the flip side of that is, for our map collections, the ones that we digitise, you can interrogate maps in a lot more detail than, say, the reference sheets we have out in the reading rooms. You can go down to street level and have a look at buildings and find out different information. But yeah, some of our, I'll probably get into real trouble for this, but some of our sort of senior guys, you look at the figures and think, let's just digitise and get rid of, that's never going to be an option, because our audiences will always demand to see the physical and have that contact with the archivist or somebody who spent time with the collection, share their information, and the archivists do equally absorb that and add that to their catalogue. And I think physical.
And I also like the strategies that Manon was bringing up with her description of the exhibitions and the changing products that responded to what the audiences were looking for. Is that a possibility of going to other spaces and inhabiting those?
It's definitely something that our VR team is actively pursuing.
Yeah.
Trying to go beyond the exhibition and almost have an exhibition in virtual reality. So it's taking it even further, and how you can experience without having to be in a space with other people.
Yeah.
Or how to interact in virtual reality with more people, more than one person. Do you then have to be in the same room, or can one be in London, one in Hong Kong? So there are lots of different things that we are actively exploring at the moment. What's also interesting is we receive a lot of requests of people who want to showcase our work through actual models, but they don't want to pay for shipment. So they just ask us for the 3D file, and they think it's fine for us to just provide them with files, and they can just print their own exhibits and have their own exhibition. So sometimes it's going a bit too far, I think. No.
And there was a couple of things I wanted to pick up on. We can't replicate digitally the emotional experience that you have when you are touching, working with a physical thing. Even as a kind of a computer scientist by background, when you have an amazing object record, there is something that is so connecting and so personal, and that you come away literally shaking from the connection. And it's like, wow. I don't know how you, virtual reality is not going to do that. I think the reading room is a hugely important part of what the archive has to offer. We've seen how people are increasingly using our reading room to self-digitise, and that's the thing that we want to encourage. But I think also the archive, the digital archive needs a reading room, not least because for all of these information rights issues, we're never going to be able to provide access to all of our records on the web. Publishing all of this stuff with all of these complex information rights, data protection, copyright, mixed copyright, there is no way that the archive is just going to be able to publish all of this material. So we have to have safe places where we can provide access to digital material. We also need to have places where we can engage people, not just those people who come to the archive with a well-worked-through research question, but people who are curious, where we can facilitate access and tell stories around the collection as part of how we democratise and widen use of the archive. So I think physical places for archives are hugely important. We should expect how people use them to change. We should do more to facilitate access for people who don't arrive with research questions, we should be absolutely confident about the emotional power and impact of our physical collections, and not lose sight of the absolute need the digital archive has for physical places where it can safely surface its collection in a really difficult information rights landscape that we're trying to navigate.
Great. Well, thank you. Any questions from the audience?
Hi. So I was actually going to ask a question around whether studies that are being done around collecting and managing physical collections can be used to some degree within the digital realm, particularly around risk and decision making on storage and monitoring corruption or degradation, which are definitely conversations that we have in collection care of physical collections. Should I just hold it over here? But then I was quite struck by what John was saying about within the digital realm, how you have to worry more about the variety rather than the volume, and then also about how you could squeeze out a lot of metadata out of the information through searchability. And this is definitely conversations that we have within the physical realm. So if we have a collection that's as varied as what we saw with Zaha's, or just within the archive we have cellulose nitrate sitting next to parchment, that increasingly also means that it's much more costly to care for that collection than just a bunch of boxes of just paper. And it's the same thing with metadata. The colorants that are used to write documents or to make the drawings tell us about history of material usage. So that is a form of metadata that provides another layer of information that is being archived along with the drawings themselves. So I guess I was going to just comment on, and if the panelists wants to take this further, I think there is a lot that can be transferred and translated between conversations and studies that are happening within collection care departments of physical collections into the digital realm.
Maybe that's an opportunity for you to tell us about how you're being disrupted.
It's interesting. So I agree with you. One of the things that we've learnt as digital archivists from our collection care department is the value of empirical measurement for understanding digital preservation risk. And up to now with digital preservation, we've tended to follow a standards-based approach. There's a number of standards you can look at. And this bothers me. I mean, it bothers me. Like, who says these are the right things to do, and how do they know? Where's their evidence? And particularly when you're looking at standards that are quite old. The other thing that bothers me is the risk that the systems we use for preserving our collection themselves pose to it. I know I look at the software that we run, and I think, geez, how on earth is our collection going to survive our digital repository? And it bothers me a lot. These systems are, they've got arms and legs all over the place. They're large and complex, and they don't always take good care of the collection. So picking up on, from the collection care world, empirical measurement of preservation risk as a core discipline, and building good preservation risk models that we can deploy is one of the areas of practice that we're looking to develop. The other is this sense of trying to do no harm, or pass the baton on to your successors having done no harm, and viewing the software that we use, which I fear a lot of it is potentially very harmful, viewing that software as being a danger, the software we use to preserve our collections, viewing it as being a danger, and taking steps to mitigate the risks that it poses to the collection, are two areas where we need to really advance digital preservation practice. And I know that's stuff that we're working on at the National Archives.
It is really early days though, isn't it? Like you were saying, it's an exciting time, partly because some of the standards are old now, but I feel like in the archive world, people are only just starting to do digital preservation. So for years, everyone was chatting about it. And then in the last 5 years, more and more places were like, okay, we'll just give it a go.
That's
So
the thinking I had.
Starting is more important than worrying about all the things you need to worry about. So just start. We're on our third generation of digital preservation system, and each one of these things have kind of looked like they're kind of Art Nouveau. And what we really need is something that's Bauhaus, and to give you a sense for what these systems are like. So we need something that's much crisper, cleaner, that is much less involved with our collections for managing them successfully, and that tries to do less. We've been simulating in software what the physical archive has done, and we need to stop that and really pick up on the collection care point. Focus hard on mitigating preservation risk using evidence.
I just wanted to ask panel members whether they recognised something similar. In the AA archives, we've been noticing that the point where practices start using digital, or where students start using digital, and it's a kind of hybrid situation. We're facing a kind of black hole where either the material's been got rid of because you haven't got the software or the hardware to play with, or to read it with. And I'm wondering if you're recognising kind of historians in 20, 30 years will be looking back and there's a kind of black hole across the board of architectural history, or am I overplaying it? Certainly we've seen lots and lots of important projects where we've got, we can't get any data whatsoever, and it seems a kind of a worrying situation.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's something we're definitely facing, and it is a worry because, you know, it's not really being dealt with. As I showed, you know, we've got all these various old formats. Well, we've got those as objects, but you know, so you can keep those as a record of the sort of the formats they came in. But in terms of what's on them, it is a real problem. And I'm sure this is a problem potentially in practices themselves before we even receive. So yeah, it's potentially there's going to be a lot of material lost, I think.
Things catch up a lot of it.
Unfortunately, I have to agree. And it's really a time bomb. We have, in the old days, we archived everything on CDs. It was the most beautiful CDs because they had lovely labels, they had all the folder structures, everything we can wish for nowadays. They were so properly curated. We had the whole stack of them, obviously. And a few years ago, we thought, let's open the CDs we need for that project. So we tried, and we couldn't open most of the files. So I said, this is it. Let's just ask our IT team to just store everything, transfer everything as quick as possible when possible. So that has now been done. We didn't throw any of the CDs away because I still hope at some point there will be a solution and those CDs will be openable. So we did save what we could, but a lot of files, unfortunately, Graham, a lot of files are lost at the moment. I still hope there will be someone that will spend money and that will really go and try to reactivate those CDs. But to me, it's a bit like the Tamagotchis. If you don't feed them constantly, it just dies out. And so there are some projects that we have very little of at the moment.
And that was the point I was trying to make really in my presentation, is that it needs that direct intervention and all of the time monitoring, and yeah, it's harder work. You can't just put it in the box.
No.
I mean, we've attempted to for preservation reasons, to digitise, access and digitise some of our audio-visual material, and in many ways that's been easier because maybe it's because we just didn't have as many formats. But you know, there are specialists out there that have access to the right equipment in order to be able to get that at least in a format that can be read, should I say. And that's not to say don't get rid of the original, but but at least it's then, it can be looked at before the original format completely degrades and you can't do anything with it. We need equivalent of that for paper-based materials.
I think the one thing is worth saying about leaving aside the physical format of digital material, when you have information encoded in some way, the archive and the user has a question of how close do I want to come to the originator's experience of working with this material. So if I have something that's encoded in a widely deployed textual format, so I can read the content, I may not be using the application that was used to create it, but I can still read it if it's in anything like the American Standard Code for Information Interchange, which is like late 1960s, or UTF-7 or UTF-8. So I can get the informational value from something using a completely different bit of software. How close do I want to come to the originator's experience? Do I want to use the precise version of the software they used to create it, running on the precise version of the operating system, running on the hardware, or something less than that? And those choices very much depend on the context of use that you have for the material, and the archivist making decisions about essentially how far am I going to go, which is really a question of how deep are your pockets, because the amount of money that you could spend is one of those how long is a piece of string type questions. Now, I think it begs some really interesting questions of historians. How much of the context do you need to be able to ask and answer good historical questions about this material? And I know as an amateur keeper of vintage computers, it does make a difference when you open a file on a piece of hardware that is 35 years old, just in terms of the whole experience of working with that object. Now this is, it's very kind of complex territory, and I think we need much more engagement by historians using our digital collections and then telling us how much of this do they need us to worry about in the archive, because for sure we can mitigate the digital preservation risk, but it's not obvious to what lengths we need to go in terms of recreating the experience. We know the experience of hardware and software combined has a really big bearing on the total context of the creator when they created the object. It's like lots of question marks and more we don't know.
I say that from experience, that is absolutely true. And that goes back to what you were saying about the reading room. So does the archivist have a responsibility to recreate the experience of opening something on that hardware? And we were talking about literary archives. I went to the University of Sussex and spoke to their person who looks after digital preservation, and they look after a lot of digital literary archives. And she was saying, do we keep all of the drafts? Do we keep every version of a text? Because if you were looking at Virginia Woolf's archive, you would care about her first draft. But with a current author, they might just give you one manuscript. But if you did a disk image of what was saved on their hard drive, you might be able to discover older, you will be able to discover old versions, but you need their consent to archive those? Or there's lots of interesting questions there, and they might be in different formats. There's all sorts of...
And it would be the same with architectural drawings as well. Yeah, to have that density to them.
Could I ask the panel their view on analogue drawings? Maybe one only sees what one wants to see, but I've recently noted a production of publications to do with architect drawings, and I believe very few architects actually draw now, but I'm particularly interested in it. And I think historically there was often a pride, or perhaps even some power as well, associated with having one's drawings in a collection. And I wonder, in your travels, how you value the sparseness or the frequency now with which you would value, either financially or culturally, analogue drawings.
Well, given that the majority of our collection is still analogue, we very much value that. And it's interesting you say about, you know, architects still actually hand drawing and so on. I mean, there has been, it's interesting that there's been this sort of kind of move back, I think, to hand drawing. And we're noticing that with the sort of more contemporary practices that we're potentially approaching for donations. There's going to be a lot of, you know, born digital material, but we're always interested in having examples of the analogue, of the hand drawing, because it just says so much about the individual and the process as well. So for us, it's still very, very important.
Question back here.
I came across John Randall, who I think worked with Cedric Price he was going through some A1 drawings, printouts from a team at Zahas who were doing a project in Saudi Arabia. I was visiting another office, but I came across him. I thought I recognised you. And he was going through A1s and redlining as it were, the print, the analogue that was coming out of digital teams. It was a sort of a nod to you, a little bit of sort of confidence, if you like. It takes a look at a big drawing to see a detail that somebody might not have seen on the screen. And I'm sort of Neanderthal about that. I'll print anything, everything, because I don't kind of trust myself. And John was checking every damn section and detail, so this thing came out right, and it did. And it wouldn't have been, I would challenge, were it not for his eyes and experience from the 60s through till now.
I don't know if it's relevant, but at the council, the internal departments that work for the county council often use physical printed copies of older things like plans or things to do with highways, and they annotate them in great detail, and then that becomes valuable because of their annotations over time, and we have to chase them to archive those, because to them it's just a working, scruffy thing, but to us it's years and years of history through physical annotation. So I think you're right, the physical is...
Yeah, you unfortunately, yes, with digital copies, sometimes those handwritten notes, they're impossible to read. So yeah, it is important to be able to retain those, and we have lots of examples of that sort of thing with working drawings where you've got the annotations, and it's there, it's recording that thought process, and as well as the process through the practice of, you know, different people signing off, and that whole how the project has evolved, and how the building, you know, kind of basically comes into being. So yeah, it is. For me, the hard copy just gives you. There's no room for error, as it were. You know, it's what you see is what you get, really. So there's no issues with it, and we have it there. It's something physical, and I mean, I always use the example of, you know, we have over 300 Palladio drawings in the collection. You know, they're over 500 years old. The digital material, if there was equivalent, they just wouldn't have lasted. You wouldn't have been able to access them. We still have these drawings from 1550. Okay, they've been well looked after, so there is that element of preservation that's really important. So that would be the same with the digital. But could you say the same about the digital material being produced today? Is that going to be around 500 years?
Well, the one irony is that our use of computers has led to a profusion of us producing things on paper with annotations. So certainly looking at government records, the amount of paper records goes up with the introduction of computers, and I'm sure it's because you can suddenly produce several copies quickly and easily and then scribble on them, and now suddenly you've got a whole bunch of paper records. Very interesting how our use of tools impacts through format as we work with information, and unexpected kind of consequences all the way around.
It's quite interesting in the film domain, the kind of interference of digital. So using filters and AI technology to create software that will automatically remove all the warts and all of like a film. I think there was an instance I got told, I'm not really sure where it was, but the software had been developed to identify scratches on the frame and remove them. But there was a particular film which was shot at the beach, and all the seagulls had been removed because the software had perceived that that was a scratch on the frame. So going back to the original is very important, you know, and obviously this interference of digital, as it were, can be a problem.
Is it true that in Hollywood, so Screen Archive Southeast are based in Chichester where I work, and one of my colleagues there was saying that they still, even if it's recorded in digital, they'll archive it on film.
I'd love to know the answer.
Yeah, that's what he was saying. So expensive productions, they'll still.
Celluloid's pretty good preservation format, right? It's got it's better than any of the forms of physical media that we have for noughts and ones.
Yeah.
I just had a small point to make, which maybe goes back to something you said, John, earlier, that perhaps we're always trying to get the digital to just mimic what the physical was doing when actually it should be doing something different altogether. I thought one of the greatest examples actually was the Zaha Hadid exhibition in the Serpentine Gallery, where you had the physical paintings there, but the VR allowed you to actually inhabit the space of the paintings, which was a totally new experience. Like, I think I've been to many Zaha Hadid exhibitions over the course of my career, but I thought the VR thing was just a fundamentally new way to experience it. And I think that all the points you made were really trying to, I think for me, helping me question how could we see the digital as not just a way to kind of digitize the physical, but it provides a supplement or something, a new way of reading that content, which I think could be really exciting to think about what that might be.
I think just to kind of add on a little bit, I'm just curious, are you archiving BIM at Zaha? Because that's really interesting, because an archive of a building itself, the use and the contributors to how the faults, it's an archive in itself.
What we archive in the archive team is more JPEGs and TIFFs and videos, because that's what the system allows us to do. So OpenAsset does not cater for CAD or any other formats. When you speak to the IT team, they tell you that yes, everything is archived because they move everything to a server called archive. So anything that is no longer used, or that a project that might be dead or is not going forward, those files they then transfer. We don't throw anything away. It's just copied onto that archive server. And they say, yes, but you can find anything. But so the preservation of digital files, as we were talking about, unfortunately, is not really taken that seriously in our office at the moment. So the files are transferred, and hopefully we can still open them and archive them. But to have a proper system in place for CAD files or BIM files, I don't think we are there yet.
So I'm going to speak up as a computer scientist. On the whole, IT people do not get archiving. Right? They don't understand. No, they really don't. They don't understand the difference between backup and preservation. Preservation is nothing like backup. And crucially, they don't get context, which drives me nuts. Absolutely. Like, how do you know what this is evidential value of? Archival context is hugely important, and no, you don't get that just by slinging some stuff on a server and backing it up 3 times. So that's one of the things that all archivists, digital archivists with a computer science background, analog archivists, we all struggle with our IT friends and colleagues who, for all of their knowledge and skills, are missing on some really basic archival concepts that we all take for granted, that they don't quite register. And the vocabulary that's used around certain bits of software that talk about archiving, when the software's doing no damn such thing, means that in some ways we've got a little bit of an uphill battle. But fight it we will.
Well, I think that, unless you've got any more pressing questions, is probably a good place to end with a call for the fight onwards fight. So thank you very much, everybody. It's really fantastic, really, really interesting.